Good afternoon. This is Russ Carnahan speaking to you from St. Louis, Missouri today. Also joined by my co-founder and colleague of BuildingAction, Andrew Goldberg. This is another in a continuing series of engagement with key policymakers on sustainable building issues. And we are pleased today, we'll be introducing soon Senator Chris Coons. We have reached out to both presidential campaigns and invited representatives to speak to our network in BuildingAction. And we are pleased to have Senator Coons accept on behalf of the Biden campaign to hear from him today. I want to cover a few things up front. Andrew, if you could scroll to the next slide. First, many of you have been involved with BuildingAction since we began these conversations about a year ago, last summer. Since those times, we have formally created BuildingAction, a 501c, with a mission to build a broad and better connected network of leaders in the building sector, particularly around sustainable building issues, and to really advance policies that transform America's buildings as an essential component of U.S. sustainability and economic policy. If we could go to the next slide. The engagement with policymakers is critical in these conversations. So far, pre-COVID and post-COVID, we have had meetings with Congressman Peter Welch and Congressman McKinley's staff, who co-chair the High Performance Building Caucus in the House. We've had meetings with Congresswoman Kathy Castor, who chairs the Special Climate Caucus in the House, Congressman Paul Tonko, who brings a special understanding to this with his engineering background, who's a real champion on green building issues. And then most recently, Congressman Don McEachin of Virginia, speaking about equity issues in the building sector. We will want to continue this series. We hope to be making an announcement soon about having a representative from the Trump campaign that can also talk about these issues with our network, and also completing a candidate survey of federal candidates on these green building issues and sharing those broadly. I'm asking you to do that. So with that, let's go on to our next slide, and let me give an introduction. I believe we're ready to do this, but it is really a distinct pleasure to introduce Senator Chris Coons, to have him join the group and address us today virtually, like so many of us have gotten used to. Senator Coons really had big shoes to fill when he went to the Senate, following Joe Biden, who had been such a long-time senior leader in the Senate, going on to be vice president, and of course, about to become the official nominee of the Democratic Party for president. He's been one of the top surrogates speaking on behalf of Vice President Biden, but he has really taken his role in the Senate and created his own brand, his own accomplishments. He serves on some critical committees since his special election to the Senate in 2010 and his reelection to a full term in 2014, serving on Senate Appropriations, Foreign Relations, Judiciary, Small Business, and Ethics Committees. He also, special interest to those of us on the call, has co-founded and leads the bipartisan Senate Climate Solutions Caucus with Senator Braun from Indiana. He, prior to the Senate, served on the Newcastle County Council and served as county executive of Newcastle County. He is a graduate of Amherst College with a BA in chemistry and political science. You don't see that combination often. And he also has a law degree from Yale and a master's degree in ethics from Yale Divinity School. His home is in Wilmington with his wife and 3 children. Welcome, Senator Coons. It is great to have you with us, and we look forward to hearing from you. So welcome. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Russ. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you to the remarkable coalition of organizations that's represented by the BuildingAction Coalition. As some of you may know, my first couple of years in the Senate, I was on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. As the ranking Democrat on the FSGG Appropriations Subcommittee, the landlord essentially for all federal buildings is a part of that committee. I have had a series of hearings over many years now to press forward ESPCs, to press forward, energy savings performance contracts. I'm assuming I'm talking to an audience that knows that off the top of your head. Senator Gardner and I, and before that, Senator Bozeman and I have had bills to really try and press forward on the billions of dollars of market opportunity, both savings for the taxpayers and work that can and should be done by American businesses, employing and installing American solutions to improving building efficiency all over the United States. Federal buildings, of course, are a terrific opportunity for this work, but private sector buildings all over the country, commercial, multifamily, some industrial settings, of course. And so I just wanted to say at the outset, as someone who has been passionate about energy savings and has seen in person the consequences and the impact of ESPCs or of other approaches towards energy efficient retrofits. When I was in the private sector, where for 8 years I worked for a global manufacturing business and helped design and implement an ESPC solution for a coalition of our 15 biggest manufacturing plants, to my service here in Delaware as a countywide elected official, where I was ultimately the county executive of a government that had 50 buildings in a very capital and cash constrained environment, where we were able to make some significant improvements, both in our consumption, our energy footprint, but also our cash flow and our reinvestment. And now as a senator who's concerned about climate change and the environment, but also about American jobs and American manufacturing, I'm thrilled with what you're doing and with this chance to have a conversation. So let me just make sure that everybody, Russ, is familiar with the core elements of the building provisions of the Biden plan. I'm someone who's proud to have given input into Biden's climate action plan. I am confident that Senator Kamala Harris fully embraces and endorses this, and the platform of the Democratic Party will continue to move us forward in a responsible way towards achievable goals. The idea that we're going to have net zero emissions by 2050 and 100% clean energy economy by then, it's a lovely aspiration. It's a great and important goal, but really what matters is how do we get from here to there? And reducing the carbon footprint of our building stock by half by 2035 is a key piece of that menu of policy objectives that should be of interest and relevance to this group. A lot of that's going to require creating specific incentives, not mandates, but incentives for energy efficiency, for appliance electrification, for improving standards that cities and states adopt. As a county executive, one of the things I was responsible for was building codes. We had building inspectors, we had plan review, and I actually, it's funny how these things work out. There's a guy named Mike Quigley, who's a congressman from Chicago. Mike Quigley was a Cook County commissioner. When Mike was in county government, he came up with a robust agenda around greening county governments. I heard him present on it. Gosh, this is 15 years ago. And I stole some of his best ideas with his permission, brought them back to Newcastle County and enacted them here in Delaware. Today, fast forward 15 years, Mike is the chairman of the FSGG committee over in the House. I'm the ranking member over in the Senate. And we just had a conversation a few weeks ago about how we continue to make real that vision we had at the county level of investing in more progressive building codes, investing in training for inspectors, providing incentives for changing both the energy consumption and the total environmental footprint of the built environment. One of the things that I'm most excited about is exploring new financing options, particularly in such a low interest rate environment, and where the power of the federal government, of the Fed and of DOE and of HUD and of some of the other significant federal agencies can and should be applied to this. One of the pieces of the Biden plan includes directing HUD to make housing that is federally subsidized or that is close in its federal partnership more energy efficient, particularly for low-income communities. And of course, one of the programs I've both implemented as a county elected and advocated for in the federal government is the Low-Income Housing Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP. I do think that we can and should be more proactive, more engaged in terms of providing incentives for retrofits that dramatically reduce the energy consumption and costs of low-income communities, and that dramatically improve the market opportunity for exactly the companies that do that sort of work. With that, Russ and Andrew, and to everybody on Building Action, I just want to thank you for recognizing that we can't stop trying to make progress on climate and on creating better American jobs and on buying American goods, services, and products. We happen to be in the middle of 3 different crises at the same time, a global pandemic, a recession brought on by that pandemic, and a renewed focus on inequality in our country. Investing in energy efficiency, investing in improving the quality of the built environment for the United States is a great way to address the second and third of those concerns, to help create high quality jobs that can't be outsourced, to help buy American, and to help address some of the inequalities in terms of housing and job opportunities that have long been a struggle for communities of color in the United States. So I do think, last, if I could, this is a particularly important time to be doing this. We've got a lot of vacant space. We've got a lot of places where this would be a great time to put people to work and to invest in energy efficiency retrofits. We've gotten a lot of road work done here in Delaware during this period when there's very few cars on the road. Now that that's beginning to come to an end and the Delaware economy is beginning to reopen, I've had some conversations with the governor where he's saying he wishes he'd been more aggressive earlier in terms of putting people to work on the roads. And I was saying to him, the next thing we ought to be pushing is putting people to work doing energy efficiency retrofits. So thank you for the opportunity to be on. I look forward to your questions, and I appreciate your leadership in this important area.
Senator, thank you so much for that great overview of the work that you're doing and the work that Vice President Biden is doing with his plans going forward. I guess I'm going to ask Andrew about some questions that may have come in while you were speaking. Andrew?
Sure, and thank you again, Senator, for joining us. A bunch of questions have come in, and if we could, one question that's come in is asking about building electrification and the extent to which building electrification is part of the Biden's climate plan, and it also will the plan help address transition to electrification, particularly among the workforce and certain professions or workforce areas that may be hurt by electrification, such as fossil fuel workers, pipe fitters, and things like that.
And Andrew, some of your question was garbled. Let me give the best answer I can, and then you tell me where I might have missed the mark. Yes, building electrification is an explicit part of the pathway towards achieving that objective of 50% reduction by 2035 for carbon footprint of the U.S. building stock. I'll tell you, as someone who has long been a close ally of organized labor and of the building trades, and someone who cares deeply about apprenticeship and work opportunities, whether that's union or merit, whether it's, but of putting people to work and giving real opportunities in this space, I would expect that a part of a Biden plan in actual implementation would recognize that it's vital to provide work opportunities to folks like the laborers, the carpenters, the plumbers, pipe fitters, steel workers, where there's a lot of work to be done. And frankly, I would expect the balance in terms of workforce training and investment to frankly be significantly stronger under a Biden administration. I'll remind you, he's somebody who grew up in a community in Claymont, Delaware, where there were a lot of UAW workers. There were a lot of folks who worked in the chemical industry, who built pipelines, who serviced both our steel mill and our oil refinery, as well as our two big auto plants here. Those plants are gone. And one of the things Joe and I have talked about a lot over the years is the ways in which the loss of the GM plant, the Chrysler plant, the steel mill, the oil refinery is still going and represented by the United Steelworkers. But the ways in which those jobs and those job opportunities going away really had a hard impact. We just had a meeting, I just had a meeting yesterday about a new port expansion project we're doing where there may be as many as 1,000 jobs created that would be union jobs. And Joe, at the end, like if there was any one piece of good news I could have given him today, that would be it. He worries deeply about the lack of enough jobs that allow folks with high skills who are willing to work hard and play by the rules to get ahead and to get into the middle class. So I would expect that workforce training component to be a big part, not just of his vision and the policy papers, but of the actual practice. The last thing you mentioned, I think, was what I'd call environmental transition equity, making sure that there are significant investments for those communities and those industries and those work and skill classifications that will be most negatively impacted by a transition away from coal or from oil as the power generation for base load and for the built environment. So I would expect any final plan by the Biden-Harris administration to include that transition assistance as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator. Next question, and we have quite a few questions, and we hope to get to as many as you have time to take, Senator. Here's a question. Much of the world looks at the total cost of ownership of a building, which looks at the total cost of operating a building over its lifespan when making budgetary decisions. Unfortunately, that's not always the case with the federal government, where they often look at first costs, which sometimes can be a bit higher. Do you support, and do you think a Biden-Harris administration would support looking at the total costs of a sustainable building as opposed to the first costs?
Well, let me make sure, Andrew, I think I understand your point. One of the things that has been simply maddening to me for years is how the uptake on ESPCs as an approach to financing energy efficiency retrofits in federal buildings is really driven by budget constraints. And I don't mean real budget constraints, I mean the very obscure and picayune rules by which investments are scored. And I've had meeting after meeting talking about total life cycle cost and how managed right, instituted right, with appropriate oversight and auditing. An ESPC, just to pick one example, is a remarkably predictable and efficient way to ensure that you are capturing the life cycle savings of an energy efficiency retrofit. There are ways in which federal budget and accounting rules make that difficult, that I've introduced legislation repeatedly to try and address. And there are ways in which both corporate accounting and some tax treatments also make it difficult. I think that's what you're asking about was, am I aware of the challenges of life cycle costing? And instead of just looking at the sticker shock of, I'm going to spend an extra $3 million on replacing the chillers and boilers for the city-county building, this is not hypothetical. But instead, I can show you predictably, and I can contract for it, how over 10 years we are guaranteed either a level or a dramatically reduced year-over-year energy cost, and then we can capture that life cycle savings and thus finance it. I mean, I agree with you. That is a deeply frustrating issue that we ought to be tackling. It requires some sophisticated technical people, but it also requires political will to change the rules about how a GSA and CVO score these things.
Great, thank you. That is exactly, I think, what the question was getting at, and that is the concern that, particularly in the case of federal buildings that may last for 50 to 100 years, looking at the life cycle of it over that span, the energy savings you put in early can really make a big difference if you're able to score that into it.
I mean, I know this is a tiny point, Andrew, but I'm old enough that I remember when buying a new car, because of a federal mandate, required it to have a sticker that showed you what was the miles per gallon of the vehicle. And that was interesting. But then they added to it something that told you a predicted average annual cost. And home builders here in Newcastle County, with whom I was meeting regularly as county executive, we had a group that was building energy efficient homes, and they were pressing for us to try and get a clear standard that essentially showed you, yes, this house will cost you $2,500 more because there's a high efficiency boiler, because there's a high efficiency higher than required by code. Here's a sticker that says to you up front, it will save you this much over 10 years. And there's work that's been done federally and at the state and local level to help finance that gap, to help publicize that gap, to help capture that gap. I do think with better informed home finance approaches and better informed consumers, we can drive some of that adoption by looking at total costs. Sorry to go on.
No, that's great. That's a great answer. Next question is, Senator Coons, thank you so much for your thoughts addressing energy efficiency, ESPCs, et cetera. They also like to applaud your staff, who they put in parentheses, some of the best on the Hill, so Jamie and Danny on these issues, and we would agree. The question is, do you see a Biden administration and the next Congress taking a more focused approach on the role of digital and software to assist in reconfiguring buildings? Things like touchless technologies, which in addition to potential performance issues can also help avoid the spread of COVID and other diseases. That part of the mix.
Yeah, I think first, absolutely. This kind of change is coming, and embracing it, recognizing it, and then using the power of it is a big piece of the challenge for American business and for American governments at the federal, state, and local level to be more competitive. We are going to be asking more of our workforce. When I was county executive, one of the last big projects I was actively involved in was the construction of a $54 million state-of-the-art LEED certified, I think it was silver, public safety building. And it had all sorts of features. And one of the features it had, of course, was it was a far more digital building than any other county building we had in our system. And I had some hard meetings with the union that represented our building maintenance folks. And here's the punchline. There were going to be fewer people involved in managing and maintaining that building. But I went back to them and said, we're going to proactively invest in training and in certification so that these folks in the county system, the ones who are going to be managing this building, will be at the cutting edge. They'll make more money. They'll have a higher level of skill. We will expect more of them, but they'll be actually mostly monitoring this building remotely. It'll be telling them that it's time for a new software update rather than it's time to go install a new filter. But it was a hard transition. It was a hard conversation. But at the end of the day, that's a transition that's happening in every business. And putting in place the workforce training and continuous training supports that will allow the deployment. Now that sensors have become incredibly cheap and easy to connect, now that the Internet of Things is not just an abstract concept, but a reality, now that smart buildings are here, we can and should be taking advantage of deploying those technologies and investing in the workforce because we're going to be able to do things we'd never dreamed of. My office in downtown Wilmington is in a building designed by IMPay that was built almost 50 years ago. And it's incredibly inefficient. It was built at a time when energy management was done remotely. So if I want to turn on the air conditioning or turn down the heat in the summer or winter, we have to call somebody in Atlanta. We really are not taking advantage of the latest technologies in terms of microclimates and building envelope. Anyway, yes, I should have simply said, yes, I fully expect a Biden administration to embrace the latest in digital technology. And bluntly, whether there is a Biden administration, which I of course hope for, or there is a second Trump administration, this is something that state and local and private sector partners can and should be working on as part of how the next generation of building codes and the next generation of innovation roll out.
Just a follow up to that, we've seen since the COVID pandemic, the challenges with keeping essential services going, whether that's hospitals or grocery stores or police and fire services, and then changing the way we gather and do things in public spaces. Been a lot written in the last few months about how the design of buildings is going to change and materials and new technologies. How do you see that effort, especially as regard to essential service workers in buildings, making that a priority in terms of these retrofits and using these kind of technologies to address these healthcare issues?
Russ, that's a great question that I haven't thought deeply enough about. I've had a lot of conversations with folks who run large and small businesses here in Delaware, and typically the New York City-based CEOs of businesses. So, for example, Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase and I had a conversation a few weeks ago about their footprint here, their workforce here, their headquarters building, and like many other CEOs, I assume it's okay to say this, they're re-examining the cost and the operations of very large center city buildings because you've got an awful lot of people who are now saying, for another 6 months, they're not particularly enthusiastic about being in elevators and being in, crowded public spaces until we've got a vaccine and until we've got a pathway out of this. But as your question implies, Russ, this is going to lead to some real considerations about air handling, about knocking down the potential for infections. In the built environment, particularly in closed spaces, I don't think we have paid enough attention in the past to the impact on public health of having very high quality filters, of having ultraviolet cleansing systems, of the impact of the seasonal flu. And I think you've got folks at every major real estate holder, every major employer looking at that. I've talked to a couple of mall companies that are thinking through what are the long-term consequences for this. Look, there was always a subset of our population that were gravely concerned about infection, were at times teased as being germaphobes, but now they look pretty smart. And this, for the first time, is going to awaken a real concern about public health in a much broader range of employers, employees, and customers. And I think there's an exciting opportunity here to partner between the state-of-the-art monitoring systems and management systems that are essential to achieving reductions in building energy footprints and improving energy efficiency, and the ways you can now remotely deliver monitoring and public health, air quality and airflow systems. So, if I were an employer of 1,000 people and half of them worked in a very concentrated building and they'd all been home for the last 6 months, and I were having a conversation with my building owner, building manager about, are we coming back or are we getting rid of half the space? If the building manager said to me, we've been meaning to invest in upgrading the HVAC and the air systems and the electrification, the energy systems of the building, would it matter to you if we had super high quality, HEPA filters, if we had a ultraviolet system installed so that everybody who comes in and out, and so we could tell you that there is daily cleansing of the entire environment of your office? I'd say, yeah, that matters to me. I want to be able to tell nervous spouses at home not to, right? But, folks who really don't want their family members going back to work too early, there's going to be an opportunity for a conversation here. And there should be an opportunity for the federal government to help with technologies, with licensing, with financing. You know, it's funny just how much the EPA was able to accomplish with Energy Star. Energy Star as a program was really not much more than a plaque. I mean, it was a, right? I mean, it was a certification process. It was voluntary. It didn't bring with it huge grants of money. But an awful lot of movement was made on energy efficiency standards by Energy Star. I think it's time for us to recognize that we're going to need a little more torque and a little more leverage, and we might put some more muscle federally behind accelerating improvements.
Great, thanks.
Great. Thank you.
Do you have time for a couple of more?
I believe I've got 10 more minutes. Absolutely.
Great. Andrew, what do you got?
Sure. Here's a question. It's actually about your master limited partnership bill for efficiency. And the question is,
you know how to make a boy happy. Nobody asks me about my MLP Parity Act.
We're asking now.
My whole day.
There you go. Well, the question is specifically about it, and surely we'd love to hear more about it, what it does. But in particular, the question is, what are the prospects for it being as part of any kind of COVID or economic relief package that may or may not happen over the next few weeks or months or whenever, and beyond that, even on building energy performance contracting? Is there any opportunity if there is a package that comes together for any of these kinds of policies in there?
Andrew, I think I'm correct on this, but and I'm also hoping and assuming that some of my crack staff who were previously referred to are on this call and can correct me to the extent I'm wrong. I believe the Master Limited Partnership Parity Act was embedded in the HEROES Act. It was just passed by the House, and I'm forgetting in which vehicle, but I think it was that. There is a package that Cornyn is championing, but that was not included in the Republican Majority HEALS Act in the Senate, that would have included things like robust ITC, and that could well have been a vehicle for the MLP Parity Act. A polite word would be flummoxed, a real word would be pissed off about the just complete collapse of negotiations on a next round of assistance. You know, I won't waste your time on a long partisan diatribe about my frustrations with where we are in negotiations. I'll simply say this, the most rewarding part of my work in this area has been bipartisan, with Jerry Moran, with John Cornyn, with Marco Rubio, on small business programs like the PPP, and on larger programs like the Master Limited Partnership, where Jerry's been a great partner in it for a long time. You know, from Lisa Murkowski to Susan Collins, from Jerry Moran to John Bozeman, we've had good support across the Republican caucus and the Democratic caucus. One of our real challenges in getting Master Limited Partnership parity through is the lack of an advocacy base that really cares about it. The last two times that we got, to the 1 yard line, OEA, the folks who represented renewable energy had something else that was just a slightly higher priority, which I understand, and that we got API from opposed to neutral, and then got some very strong players in the MLP space to advocate for it. It got us almost there, but if we're going to get MLP parity as an energy efficiency and retrofitting financing tool, we need some folks to step up and fight for it. Right now, it's a very cloudy near-term future because it's gotten all caught up in election politics. But we've done disciplined and hard and thorough work now over 8 years to get MLP parity to the point where it should be a part of any energy tax package. I've exhausted my colleagues talking about it. There are several of them that when they see me coming, they go, I know, MLP parity, Jesus, stop. But it's like ESPCs. It is simple, it is clear, it is powerful, it's smart, it's bipartisan, and those are the bills that don't get done. So we need some advocates helping us fight for it.
Great, thank you. I'm going to actually combine a couple of questions into maybe a larger question, which is, it speaks to really what's happening at the state and local level. And as a former county leader yourself, you know all very well, of course, there's a lot that can be done and should be done. at the state and local level to make buildings more efficient. And the question is, what can Washington do? What can a Biden administration, if there is one in Congress, do to help state and local governments really support their efforts to make their buildings, they're talking about state or local buildings, libraries, schools, and so on, or just in general advance policies at the state and local level to help their communities become more sustainable and more efficient?
I think, as someone who was active in the National Association of Counties, or NACO, for a long time, and who attended meetings of the League of Cities, the Conference of Mayors, the NCSL, we need clear federal leadership. We need folks at HUD and at EPA and at Commerce who are helping, and at Labor, who are helping with the workforce training, who are helping with what are the best standards, who are investing in research. There's a lot of great work and a lot of thinking being done, a lot of acting, a lot of actually implementing being done at the state and county and city level. And we could really help facilitate information sharing and standard setting in a way that has happened in the past, and I think is happening at a less elevated rate now. We can improve apprenticeship programs and help put some of these issues front and center in them. We can improve the coordination in research, in policy, and in substantive programming between counties and cities, states, and the federal government. More than anything, hanging the lantern on it, participating and contributing to national and global conferences will send a real signal. If my memory serves, just the ESPC or the energy efficiency retrofit market for federal buildings alone was $9 billion as of the time Senator Gardner and I introduced our bill. Federal buildings are a small subset of total public sector buildings. If you think about how much could and should be done in schools all over this country, in county and city buildings all over this country, it's huge. There's enormous potential. And one of the things that I intend to do in an infrastructure conversation with the former vice president is to continue to press for a massive investment in improving the quality of our schools. If we invest in retrofitting schools in ways that improve the public health features of our schools, improve the physical security aspects of our schools, and improve the energy efficiency of our schools, we create good American jobs, we can buy American products and services, and we can actually improve the focus of children on learning. When I worked for the National I Have a Dream Foundation, I went to 50 cities in several years, and the schools that program serves, where that program engages, are among the toughest and worst in our whole country. Probably half the schools I went into, I had to go through a metal detector to get in, and I don't think I was in a school that was built any more recently than 50 years ago. So I was in a lot of schools in very tough neighborhoods that were in very bad shape. And it was easy for me to see why it was harder to focus and to learn and to have a safe environment. This was 25 years ago I was doing this work. I am convinced that if I went back and visited many of those, actually I did just visit one of them here in Delaware, there's not been the kind of focused, concentrated investment. That's at the local level. Sorry to go off on schools, but your question really was state and local governments. There are more school buildings in terms of public buildings than almost any other segment. And I do think that really could be a critical partnership. You've got millions of parents anxious about schools reopening safely. We already had a backlog of improvements for safety from a physical safety perspective. I really think we could wrap all three of these together and make for a bold program that would invest in energy efficiency, in public health, and in safety for America's schools.
Great, thank you. I will note somebody has just asked if they can get some more information about MLP parity. They think it's a great idea, so you're already getting more converts to the cause. We'll send out work with your staff and get some information out to attendees about that. If you have time for one more question, if I can. One of the key issues within issues about climate, of course, is resilience. It's how we protect communities now from the impacts of climate, and certainly Delaware like many places, understands that all too well, particularly this year in a very active hurricane season. To what extent does the Biden plan look at how you can help make buildings more resilient and communities more resilient from natural threats like hurricanes, fires, and so on?
That is a key part of the plan, Andrew. We really can't take climate change seriously without looking at resiliency. One of the things I hope, or I assume the folks on this call know, is that I introduced one of the first, if not the first, bipartisan carbon fee bills in the Senate with Senator Flake, very conservative, close friend of mine from Arizona. And in this Congress, Senator Mike Braun from Southern Indiana, freshman conservative Republican senator. Senator Braun and I have created a climate solutions caucus, and we have 14 members, 7 Republican, 7 Democrat. One of the things we've been talking about is resiliency. Regardless of whether or not you think a carbon fee is the right approach, regardless of what you think is the right pathway, it is undeniable that the federal government is spending more and more and more money year in and year out responding to wildfires, to hurricanes, to tornadoes. And I think that we have inevitable dramatic costs for the federal government in terms of the impact of sea level rise, earlier, bigger, stronger storms. I think tragically that Superstorm Sandy, which decimated the coasts of New Jersey and New York and Connecticut, and sort of tore up my region, I think hurricanes like that are going to come earlier, come stronger, and have more impact. So regardless of whether you fully buy into climate change and the need for adaptation, investing in resiliency of infrastructure and buildings proactively, it makes just good business sense. So one of the things we might talk about for Building Action is engaging with the Climate Solutions Caucus and engaging with Senator Braun. He's a businessman, a business owner, a conservationist, and a conservative. And he sees the wisdom of using modern financing tools, modern incentives, and allowing the private sector to drive a lot of the resiliency investments that we're all going to need in our country.
Thanks so much. I applaud not just the work you're doing in your own right, the work you're doing representing Vice President Biden, but also the bipartisan work that you're doing in the Senate. All good stuff. I want to give you one last softball question, if I may, since it's so timely and just happened. Talk to us about Biden's pick of Kamala Harris and what do you think that means for the ticket?
I think Senator Harris is someone who, as folks get to know her and get to know her real record, they'll recognize why Joe chose her. Kamala, a colleague, someone who serves on the Judiciary Committee with me, I remember well meeting her 4 years ago. I first got to know of her, 20 years ago when I read her book about smarter policing. When I first met her 4 years ago when she was running for the Senate, she immediately struck me as a smart, bright, focused, aggressive, kind, thoughtful. She's an ambitious person, and I think that's a good thing. When I say aggressive, I've seen her on the Judiciary Committee ask very tough questions of nominees in front of us. But I frankly also think in governing, it's important when you get tasked with something difficult that you pull people together, you set a clear agenda, and then you pursue it relentlessly. She was elected 3 times statewide in our most populous state. And in her terms as Attorney General, she was responsible for an entity that had 7,000 attorneys. That's an awful lot of lawyers. And I think that folks will come to see that her compassion, her heart, and her intellect will make her not just a great running mate, not just a good campaigning partner, but a good substantive and governing partner for Joe Biden should he be elected. Let me mention one other thing, Russ. Coons.senate.gov/MLP. There's a white paper up there. It may be a little out of date, but that's where I knew for a long time I could direct colleagues and friends if they wanted just a quick summary on the bill as it was in the last Congress. And I trust that Danny we'll make sure you've got the most up-to-date information about it. You've made my whole day. The larger point, Russ and Andrew and everybody on the call here, while I am deeply passionate about the election and Joe Biden's chances, I think energy efficiency is something that can and should be bipartisan. Rob Portman and Jeanne Shaheen for years have been laboring away to get the Portman-Shaheen bill done on energy efficiency. It is a common sense, easy solution that will accomplish positive things in a time where we've got record deficits and significant fiscal challenges. The most cost-effective next dollar of energy generation is for the energy you don't consume. So I think spreading the gospel about energy efficiency and about building efficiency and about ways that we can work together to invest in the workforce, to provide incentives, and to come up with functional ways to achieve it is something that really should appeal across the political spectrum, regardless of the environment we're in come January.
Yeah, and that's what we have found across the board, from business groups to labor groups and faith-based environment, you name it. There's so many common areas of interest that it's one of the real fundamental reasons behind our building this network. And so, again, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your time today in the middle of so many things going on. And we certainly look forward to following up with you and with all the folks on this network. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Russ. Thank you, Andrew. I look forward to being in close contact and, God willing, getting MLP parity finally passed into law.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a good one.
So a couple of things just as we wrap up, and thank you again, everybody, for being on the call. As I think Russ began to mention right before the senator came on, we're looking to do a whole number of activities as we get into election season to make sure that buildings are part of the agenda. We'll be sending out soon questionnaires to federal candidates for House and Senate to gauge their views on sustainable building issues, and we'll share those. We're developing a series of webinars in the fall to talk really about the future of building policy as we move into 2021, and certainly as we get into the next Congress come January, and we expect there to be probably 100 new members of Congress or so. We want to continue to engage with them. So again, be looking out for all that information. If you're not already on our mailing list, you can go to buildingaction.org and sign up to join their mailing list to get information about all of these activities.
And finally, to wrap up, want to thank our founding members and sponsors, the National Electrical Contractors Association, International Facility Management Association, Steel Framing Industry Association, and Trane Technologies, and so many others who have been involved in organizing and building this network. We really appreciate it. Please join us as an ally. As Andrew said, just adds your company or organization to our list of allies, and we keep you informed about our activities, but also consider joining officially as a member. Again, we can't thank you all enough, and please keep in touch, and we'll let you know about our additional upcoming activities. Be safe, and we'll look forward to being in touch with you soon.